The grainy nanny cam footage showed my sister stealing our mother's heirloom. But that wasn't the part that shattered my world. It was the next frame. My father walking in, seeing her commit the crime, and giving a slow, deliberate nod of approval. My name is Clara, I'm 29, and in that dingy motel room, I learned my family hadn't just suspected me of being a thief. They had framed me. They orchestrated the entire lie, and I had to find out why they would rather destroy me than let me discover the secret that heirloom protects. Before I tell you how I uncovered the truth, tell me where you're from in the comments below. Be sure to like and subscribe, because if you know what it's like to fight for your own story against all odds, you're going to want to see this through to the end. The mist hung low over Oak Haven, New York, like a shroud that wouldn't lift. My rental car's tires crunched on the gravel as I pulled into the long driveway of the Montgomery house, the only home I'd ever known until I ran from it. The late November air was sharp, cutting through my thin Chicago coat. The old Victorian loomed ahead, its gabled roof and chipped paint unchanged since I was a kid. It smelled of damp leaves and memory, and as I stepped out, the silence hit me harder than the cold. No birds, no wind, just the steady tick-tock of the grandfather clock I could already hear through the walls, counting out time like it was judging me. I was here for Mom's funeral. Eleanor Montgomery, gone at 62, her body finally giving up after years of quiet battles with illness. I hadn't been back in a year, not since I'd driven her to that specialist in Albany. My life was in Chicago now, blueprints, late nights, and a one-bedroom apartment I could barely afford. Oak Haven was a place I'd outgrown, or so I told myself. But standing there, the weight of it all pressed down, the house, the town, the family I'd left behind. The front door creaked as I pushed it open. The foyer smelled of beeswax and old wood, a scent that yanked me back to childhood, hiding under the dining table, tracing the grain of the oak floor, while Mom polished the silver. Dad was in his leather armchair by the fireplace, his face carved from stone. Arthur Montgomery didn't do hugs. He barely looked up, just nodded, his eyes fixed on the fire. "Clara," he said, like my name was an obligation. Beth was different. My older sister swept in from the kitchen, her arms wrapping around me in a hug that felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced it in the mirror. Her perfume was too sweet, her smile too tight. "You made it," she said, like I'd won a prize for showing up. Her husband Mark followed, all charm and pressed flannel, offering to take my coat. His grin was the kind you see on real estate billboards, too perfect to trust. We sat in the living room, the air thick with things unsaid. Beth talked about the funeral arrangements. Tomorrow at St. Mary's, reception after, casseroles already piling up from neighbors. Dad grunted responses, his hands folded like he was praying for the conversation to end. I tried to ask about Mom, about her last days, but Beth waved it off. "She was peaceful," she said, her voice clipped. "You know how she was." Then, as I sipped weak coffee from a chipped mug, Beth's tone shifted. "Do you remember Mom's silver music box?" she asked, her eyes flicking to mine, too sharp for casual. "The one Grandma passed down? It's gone missing." She paused, stirring her tea, the spoon clinking against the porcelain. "Mom was confused near the end, said she gave it to someone for safekeeping." Her gaze lingered on me, heavy with meaning. Mark leaned forward, his smile gone. Dad's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. I froze, the mug burning my palms. "I don't know anything about it," I said, but my voice sounded thin, like a kid caught lying. Beth's lips pressed into a line and the room felt smaller, the tick-tock louder. They didn't believe me. I could feel it, the suspicion wrapping around me like the mist outside. This wasn't just a question. It was the start of something worse. The next morning the house felt like a courtroom. I'd barely slept, the guest room's lumpy mattress and the weight of Beth's words keeping me awake. I came downstairs to find them waiting in the study, the air thick with dust and judgment. Dad sat at the head of the oak table, his hands clasped like a judge. Beth stood by the window, her arms crossed, her eyes red but hard. Mark leaned against the doorframe, blocking the only exit, his casual stance a lie. This wasn't a family meeting, it was an ambush. "Clara, sit," Dad said, his voice low, the kind that made you obey as a kid. I did, my hands clammy against the polished wood. Beth didn't look at me, just stared out at the gray yard. "We need to talk about the music box," she said, her voice steady but sharp, like a knife wrapped in velvet. It's not just some trinket. It's worth thousands, and it's gone. I opened my mouth to protest, but she cut me off, laying out their case like a prosecutor. We know your firm's been struggling, Clara, layoffs, right? And that fancy Chicago apartment must be tight on your salary. Her words were slow, deliberate, each one a jab. You were here last spring with Mom. You had a key to the house, you were alone with her. My stomach twisted. How did they know about the layoffs? I'd never told them. I'd kept my life in Chicago private, a wall between me and this place. But they'd been digging, building a story where I was the villain. I didn't take anything, I said, my voice shaking. I was here to help Mom, not rob her. Dad's eyes met mine, and for a moment I thought he'd soften, see me as his daughter. But his voice was cold, final. Family means trust, Clara. That box was our history. If you needed money, you could have asked. We're not going to the police, this stays in the family. Just give it back. No questions. No questions. The words hung there, a guillotine. They didn't want the truth, they wanted a confession. I looked at Beth, her face a mask of pity and accusation. Mark's hand rested on her shoulder, a silent signal of alliance. I was alone, the black sheep branded a thief. I didn't take it, I repeated, but it was like shouting into a void. They'd already decided. I stood, my chair scraping the floor. I'm not doing this. I grabbed my bag, my coat, and walked out, their eyes burning into my back. The front door slammed behind me, the sound echoing in the empty yard. I drove to the edge of town, to a motel with flickering neon and stained carpets. The room was cold, the bed sagging, but it was better than that house. I sat on the edge of the mattress, my hands shaking, the weight of their betrayal crushing me. I was an outsider now, not just in Oak Haven but in my own family. The shock of it burned, but beneath it something else stirred. Anger, sharp and alive. They thought they could bury me. They were wrong. The motel room smelled of mildew and cheap air freshener. I sat on the bed, my laptop glowing in the dark, my mind replaying Beth's accusation, Dad's cold verdict. I wasn't a thief, but they'd made me feel like one, and that hurt worse than anything. I wanted to scream, to drive back and force them to listen, but what good would it do? They'd closed ranks, and I was on the outside, looking in at a family that wasn't mine anymore. Then it hit me. A memory, faint but sharp. Last spring, when I'd taken Mom to the specialist, she'd been different. Not just sick, but scared. She'd whispered about things being moved, about not feeling safe alone. Dad had brushed it off, said she was confused, but I'd seen the fear in her eyes. I'd bought a nanny cam, a tiny thing I hid on her bedroom shelf, linked to a cloud account only I could access. I'd forgotten about it until now, but if that camera was still there, it might hold the truth. I couldn't wait. If I was going to clear my name, I needed proof, and I needed it tonight. The idea of sneaking into that house felt wrong, like I was proving their accusations right, but I had no choice. I pulled on my black jacket, grabbed my keys, and drove back under the cover of a moonless night. The town was asleep, the streets empty except for the occasional streetlight flickering like it was giving up. The Montgomery house stood dark, its windows like blind eyes. I parked a block away and moved through the shadows, my breath visible in the cold. The back window by the kitchen had a new sensor, a cheap stick-on thing Mark probably installed. I pried it loose with a pocket knife, my hands steady despite the adrenaline. The window slid open with a soft groan, and I climbed inside, landing on the linoleum floor I used to mop as a teenager. The house was a maze of memories. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow on the wallpaper, felt like a ghost watching me. I moved silently, my sneakers soft against the oak stairs. Mom's bedroom was at the end of the hall, the door half open. My heart pounded as I slipped inside, the air heavy with the scent of her lavender lotion. The nanny cam was still there, tucked behind a dusty porcelain figurine. I pulled the memory card, my fingers trembling, and turned to leave. Then I saw it. The river stone on her vanity, smooth and gray, the one she'd hold when she was anxious. I don't know why I took it. Maybe it was the last piece of her I could hold on to. I slipped it into my pocket and moved back through the house, my pulse racing as I climbed out the window and disappeared into the night. Back at the motel, I plugged the memory card into my laptop. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. I fast-forwarded through days of nothing. Mom sleeping, Beth bringing trays of food until I hit the day after the funeral. There was Beth, alone in Mom's room, her movements quick and deliberate. She went straight to the dresser, pulled out the silver music box, and slipped it into her bag. My breath caught, a mix of triumph and rage. I had her. But then the footage kept rolling. Dad walked in, his face tired, lined with grief. He saw Beth with the box, and his eyes flickered. Not with anger, but with something worse. Resignation. He gave a slow nod like he'd expected it and walked out. My heart sank. He knew. He'd always known. They'd set me up, and the betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. I wasn't just alone, I was erased. The motel room felt like a cage, the walls closing in as the laptop screen glowed with the damning footage. Beth, slipping Mom's silver music box into her bag like it was nothing. Dad, standing there, his nod a silent agreement to her theft. My hands shook as I paused the video. The grainy image frozen on his face, resigned, complicit. They hadn't just accused me, they'd orchestrated it, built a lie to keep me out. The anger burned hot, a fire in my chest, but beneath it was something worse, the hollow ache of knowing my family had chosen to betray me. I leaned back on the sagging bed, the river stone from Mom's vanity heavy in my pocket. I wanted to scream, to drive back and shove the truth in their faces, but what would that prove? They'd already rewritten me as the villain. Instead, I scrubbed through the footage again, desperate for anything else that could explain why. Why the music box? Why me? I scrolled back to 3 days before Mom died. The timestamp showed late afternoon, the room dim with winter light. Mom was in bed, her face pale but her eyes sharp, the way they got when she had something important to say. Beth sat beside her, holding her hand, but there was a tension in her posture, like she was waiting for something. The audio crackled, then cleared, and Mom's voice came through, weak but deliberate. "The box is for you, Beth," she said. "But what's inside? The key and the letters? You must give those to Clara. It's the only way to make it right. Promise me." My breath caught. Beth's response was quick, too quick. "Of course, Mom," she said, her voice smooth, dismissive. She leaned down, kissed Mom's forehead, and left the room. The footage showed Mom staring at the ceiling, her lips moving silently, like she knew Beth wouldn't keep her word. I paused the video, my heart pounding. The music box wasn't the real prize. It was a cover, like a distraction. Whatever was inside, those letters, that key, was what they didn't want me to have. I rewound further, searching for more, but the footage only showed quiet moments. Mom sleeping, Dad reading in the corner, Mark bringing in groceries, nothing else about the box. I slammed the laptop shut, my mind racing. Beth had stolen it to keep me from the truth, and Dad had let her. But why? What was so important that they'd rather burn me than let me know? I pulled the river stone from my pocket, turning it over in my hands. It was smooth, worn by years of Mom's touch, but there was something else, an indentation, like it was meant to fit somewhere. A memory flickered, Mom showing me a hiding spot when I was a kid, a loose stone in the old wall at the back of the property. She'd called it our secret, a place to keep treasures. My pulse quickened. If Mom wanted me to have something, she wouldn't trust Beth. She'd hide it where only I would look. I grabbed my jacket and drove to the edge of the property, the headlights cutting through the dark. The stone wall was overgrown, crumbling, hidden behind a tangle of brambles. I found the spot, a section where the stones were uneven, and pressed the river stone against it. It fit perfectly, like a key in a lock. I pried the loose stone free, my fingers scraping against moss and dirt. Inside was a small cavity, and there, wrapped in a rotting canvas bag, was another music box, not the shiny silver one Beth took, but an older tarnished one, its edges worn by time. I sat back on my heels, the cold ground seeping through my jeans. This was it. The real heirloom. The one Mom meant for me. The motel's fluorescent light buzzed as I set the tarnished music box on the wobbly desk. It was heavier than it looked, the metal cold against my fingers. My hands shook as I used a hairpin to pick the lock, the mechanism giving way with a soft click. The lid creaked open, revealing not jewelry or trinkets, but a small silver key and a stack of yellowed letters tied with a faded red ribbon. My heart thudded. This was what Mom wanted me to find. This was what Beth and Dad didn't want me to see. I untied the ribbon, the paper brittle under my touch. The letters were handwritten, the ink faded but legible, addressed to Mom from someone named Michael. The first one was dated 30 years ago, before I was born. "My dearest Eleanor," it began, and the words that followed were like a punch to the gut. They were love letters, raw and unguarded, describing stolen moments by the lake, dreams of a life together. Michael's handwriting was bold, his words full of hope and longing, but there was a sadness too, a sense of something slipping away. I read on, the motel room fading around me. The letters grew more desperate, detailing arguments, promises, and a love that couldn't survive the weight of reality. The final letter was dated just after my birth. "I know you've chosen him," Michael wrote, "for stability, for the life you think you owe Beth. But Clara, she's mine, isn't she? I'll never ask you to leave Arthur. I just want to know her, even from a distance." The world tilted. I dropped the letter, my hands shaking so hard I could barely breathe. Clara. Me. Not Arthur's daughter. Michael's. My whole life. Every argument with Dad, every cold glance, every moment I felt like I didn't belong, suddenly made sense. I wasn't the black sheep because I left Oakhaven, I was the black sheep because I was never his. The key gleamed in the box, mocking me. I wanted to throw it across the room, to scream, to tear the letters apart, but I couldn't move. I just sat there, staring at the truth Mom had hidden, the truth Beth and Dad had buried, to protect their perfect family. The music box wasn't just an heirloom, it was a confession, a bomb that blew apart everything I thought I knew. I thought of Mom, her quiet strength, the way she'd look at me sometimes, like she was memorizing me. She'd carried this secret for decades, raising me in a house built on a lie, protecting me from a truth that would have broken me sooner. But she'd also trusted me to find it, to be strong enough to face it. The anger I'd felt toward Beth and Dad shifted, mingling with a deeper hurt. For Mom, for the life she'd sacrificed, for the father I'd never know. I tucked the letters and key into my bag, my resolve hardening. They thought they could erase me. But I had the truth now, and I wasn't going to let it stay buried. I didn't know what the key unlocked, but I'd find out. And when I did, I'd make them face what they'd done, not just to me, but to Mom, to the family they claimed to protect. The next morning, I walked back into the Montgomery house like I was stepping into a war zone. The air was thick with the smell of coffee and grief, the dining table covered in paperwork, funeral bills, estate documents. Dad sat at the head, his hands folded, Beth sorting papers with a forced calm. Mark stood by the window, his arms crossed, watching me like I was a stray dog that might bite. I didn't care. I had the music box, the letters, the key. I had the truth. I set the tarnished box on the table, the thud loud in the quiet room. "You wanted to know about a missing heirloom," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Let's talk about what was really missing." I opened the box, pulling out the letters and laying them out like evidence in a trial. Beth's face went pale, Dad's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. Mark shifted, his charm replaced by something harder, calculating. I didn't give them a chance to speak. "I saw the footage," I said. "Beth, you took the silver box. Dad, you knew. You both let me take the fall to keep me from this." I tapped the letters. "Mom wanted me to have these. She wanted me to know the truth, about Michael, about who I am." Beth's eyes widened, but she recovered quickly, her voice shaking with rehearsed tears. "Clara, this is crazy. You're making things up, forging letters to hurt us." Mark stepped forward, his tone sharp. "You're desperate, Clara. You've always been jealous of Beth, of this family. This is low, even for you." I laughed, a bitter sound that surprised me. "Jealous? You think I want your life, Beth, your perfect little act? You stole from Mom, from her dying wish, and you let me burn for it." I turned to Dad, my voice breaking. "And you? You raised me knowing I wasn't yours, and you still chose to lie, to let me think I was the problem." Dad's face was a mask, but his eyes betrayed him. Guilt, pain, maybe shame. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice low, final. "Your mother was a good woman. You're disgracing her memory with these stories." He stood, towering over me, and for a moment I was 10 years old again, shrinking under his disapproval. But I wasn't that girl anymore. "You can lie to the town, to the neighbors, to yourselves," I said, my voice steady now. "But you can't lie to me anymore. I know who I am, and I know what you did." I grabbed the letters and the key, leaving the music box on the table like a challenge. I walked out, their silence heavier than any words. The door slammed behind me, and I knew I'd never step foot in that house again. The cold November air stung my face as I walked away from the Montgomery house for the last time. the weight of the letters and the silver key in my bag grounding me. The confrontation had left me raw, my anger spent, but not my resolve. I couldn't fight their lies head-on. Not in Oak Haven, where Dad's stoic reputation and Beth's perfect daughter act held more sway than the truth. The town would close ranks around them, painting me as the bitter runaway who'd spun a story to hurt her grieving family. I'd seen it happen before to others who dared challenge the way things were here. But I wasn't going to beg for their belief. I was done with that house, that life. I needed answers, not revenge. The key burned a hole in my thoughts. It was small, tarnished, with a delicate loop at the end, like it belonged to something old and important. One of the letters had mentioned a name, David Chen, a lawyer in Syracuse, someone Mom had trusted with something she couldn't tell Dad or Beth. I drove the hour to the city, the highway stretching out under a gray sky, my mind replaying Mom's words from the footage, "It's the only way to make it right." Whatever this key unlocked, it was her final gift to me, and I wasn't going to let it slip away. David Chen's office was in a nondescript brick building, the kind you'd pass without noticing. The receptionist, a woman with kind eyes and a messy bun, led me to a small office cluttered with files and coffee mugs. David was older than I'd expected, maybe 60, with a calm demeanor that put me at ease despite the storm in my chest. I showed him the key, the letters, and explained everything. Mom's death, Beth's theft, Dad's complicity, the truth about Michael. He listened without interrupting, his face unreadable until I finished. "That key," he said, adjusting his glasses, "opens a safe deposit box. Your mother set it up years ago in your name to be accessed only after her passing." He pulled a file from a drawer, the paper yellowed but official. "She came to me when you were a baby, after things with Michael ended. She wanted to make sure you'd have something, no matter what happened." He drove me to a bank across town, the key trembling in my hand as we entered the vault. The safe deposit box was small, unassuming, but when I opened it, my breath caught. Inside was a portfolio of stocks, modest but enough to give me a start. There was a deed to a small lakeside cottage, its address unfamiliar but written in Mom's careful handwriting. And there at the bottom was a notarized affidavit, dated just before my first birthday. It laid out everything. Mom's affair with Michael, her choice to stay with Arthur for Beth's sake, Arthur's agreement to raise me as his own. A single photograph slipped from the envelope, a young Eleanor, smiling brighter than I'd ever seen her, standing next to a man with kind eyes and a crooked grin. Michael. My father. I sat there, the cold metal of the vault pressing against my back, tears blurring my vision. Mom had carried this secret her whole life, protecting me, protecting all of us, in her quiet way. She'd known the truth would hurt, but she'd also known I'd need it someday. This wasn't just an inheritance of money or property, it was her truth, her love, her way of setting me free. I drove to the cemetery that evening, the sky bruised with dusk. Mom's headstone was simple, etched with beloved wife and mother. I knelt in the damp grass, tracing the words with my fingers. Quiet strength, it said, and I understood now. It wasn't just about enduring illness, it was about carrying a secret that held our family together and tore it apart. I placed a sprig of Queen Anne's lace, her favorite wildflower, at the base of the stone, its delicate white petals glowing in the fading light. "Thank you," I whispered, not sure if I was thanking her for the truth or for trusting me to find it. 6 months later, I stood in my new studio in Chicago, the skyline sprawling outside my window like a promise kept. The lakeside cottage had sold for enough to pay off my debts and lease this space. A small, sunlit room filled with blueprints, pencils, and the chaos of starting my own architectural firm. It wasn't glamorous, not yet, but it was mine. Every line I drew, every plan I sketched, felt like building a future I'd chosen, not one handed to me by guilt or expectation. The portfolio from Mom's safe deposit box had been a lifeline, not a fortune, but enough to give me a chance. I'd quit my corporate job, tired of the endless grind for someone else's vision. This studio, with its creaky floors and mismatched furniture, was my rebellion, my proof that I could start over. I kept Michael's photograph on my desk, not to dwell on what might have been, but to remind me I was more than the lies I'd grown up with. I was Clara Montgomery, daughter of Eleanor and Michael, and I was enough. An email popped up on my laptop one morning, the subject line blank. It was from Beth. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the delete button, but curiosity won out. The message was one sentence. You win. Enjoy what's left. No apology, no explanation, just the bitter sting of her defeat. I stared at the words, waiting for the anger to flare, but it didn't. I felt nothing. Not pity, not triumph, just a quiet certainty that I didn't need her validation anymore. I deleted the email and turned back to my work. The Montgomery house was a memory now, its tick-tock clock and suffocating silence left behind in Oakhaven. I hadn't spoken to Dad or Beth since that day at the dining table, and I doubted I ever would. The family I'd longed to belong to was gone, not because they'd cast me out, but because I'd outgrown it. I'd spent years chasing their approval, thinking it would make me whole, but Mom had given me something better, the truth, and the freedom to build my own life. I picked up a pencil, the Chicago skyline glowing gold in the evening light. The city hummed outside, alive with possibility. I wasn't healed, not completely. The hurt of betrayal, of a father who wasn't mine, still lingered like a bruise, but I was moving forward, one design at a time, crafting a future that didn't need to echo the past. As I sketched the lines of a new building taking shape under my hand, I felt it. A quiet triumph, not over them, but for me. I was finally home. Thank you for following my journey. If you've ever felt like the outcast, the black sheep in your own family, here is the lesson my mother's secret taught me. Your worth is not defined by their accusations or their approval. Sometimes, the family you are born into is not the one you are meant to belong to. True strength isn't about winning them back. It's about having the courage to walk away and build a life where you are the one who signs off on the blueprints. You are your own home.